go inside the Jimmy Butler trade and like really now that this has happened, it's a little over 24 hours old.
Mhm.
Let's get into some of the guts of this, if you will. Like, how did this sort of come together, and what's the feeling in the organization now that it's done?
They're ecstatic. They really are. And look, everybody is gonna every team is happy with their trades after they make them, but there is just a giant sigh of relief at this point, and it's for a lot of reasons. But one reason is, as I'm starting to get the postmortems on this, until KD said no to the Warriors, the Heat had no trade. So that's not something that we've harped on enough, but they believe they were bleep out of luck at that point because the Phoenix thing was just never going to happen. I'm not talking about the Durant part, but anything with Jimmy related to Beal, it was a non-starter all the way along. Phoenix could not find another team. We're going to talk about the losers of this deadline. To me, the single biggest loser is Matt Ishbia because he mangled this. First, they've kind of put the idea in Jimmy's head, which created a lot of this mess. But then they've come out of this with a broken locker room. They're going to end up having to trade KD after this season. Beal's not happy. Nobody's happy. They didn't upgrade the team. They just basically dumped Nurkic. Disaster class is the best way to put it. And I'm not blaming it on James Jones because before Ishbia got there, James Jones was a pretty good GM. And also, I know JJ personally, and I
Mhm.
just don't believe he would have signed off on most of this stuff if he was running the show. So, total mess. But at that point, the Heat had nothing. And as I'm getting sort of the autopsy on all of this and what's happened, they didn't think they had a trade. And they thought they were going to have to take Jimmy past the deadline. And so just a couple things on this, and then we'll get obviously to the things Jimmy has said tonight. They were never intending to keep PJ Tucker. So I want to be clear on that because when we go through these trades as they're happening, the way it's been described to me is, it plays out on social media like checkers, but it's really chess. And there were moves that they were looking to make. Was the Mitchell move always going to be made? Not necessarily. We know what happened with Kyle Anderson, who I'll get to that in a second as well. But
Mm.
Tucker was a contract, not a player to them
Right.
at this stage. They
Right.
they needed the contract to do something else. So PJ, and that's why originally when I saw that trade, I was like, okay, B minus. I raised it to B plus when they got Mitchell out of this from the Heat side. And you could argue it'll be higher if that pick turns into something, which is a pick that the Heat insisted upon. I know for sure that Ellisberg, their general manager, Andy Ellisberg, insisted on that particular pick, and there was not going to be a deal without it. So the protections that were put in, top 10 for 2 years, but then getting it unprotected for 27, that was something that Andy pushed for. So, and they ended up getting it. But they did not think they had a deal. We would have a much different story here if KD had said yes to the Warriors. We would probably be looking at Jimmy Butler being asked to report back to the Heat on Monday.
Jesus, because that was gonna
That's
be
how close
that was gonna be my
that's
follow
how
up.
close this was.
That was gonna be
Yeah.
my follow up. Like, if Kevin Durant ends up going to the Warriors,
Mhm.
what's the pivot if there is one? Did they not have
I don't
another
think there was
one?
one.
Would they? Would
I
they?
mean,
They would have had to come up with one, basically.
right. They were looking for something, but
You don't
once
know
he
what that
said
would have
no to the
looked like.
Warriors, there was not anything obvious because he had shut down pretty much every other possibility. I know they had conversations with Memphis earlier in the process, but those were dead. So there really wasn't a place to send him. Milwaukee was never as viable as people made it out to be. So really it came down to, they had one place to turn. It was Golden State, and it was because they were not taking Durant. Again, the Heat did inquire about Durant. I reported that. Nobody's disputed that since. I know Barry, others have reported it as well. They did inquire about him, but it passed basically because of what Phoenix wanted at the time. And, again, once Durant said he wasn't going to go to Golden State, because the whole idea was traded to Golden State then flips him, right? And talk about Jimmy. Okay. So, and then flips him back for Durant. But then the Heat were like, okay, well, we'll if you're going to trade Durant, we're interested in talking about Durant.
Right.
And again, Durant didn't want to go to Golden State in the first place. And then after that, they kind of shut down the whole idea of trading him at all. So once Durant wasn't going to Golden State, the Heat were able to move in and try to close this thing with Golden State. And again, it was an insistence on that particular pick that kind of got this over the finish line. The other thing I can tell you is the Kyle Anderson part. There were some in basketball operations who wanted the Heat to keep him anyway. That they think he's actually going to find his way into Spo's good graces and give him another option. And I can see that. Kyle Anderson's that kind of player. I know he doesn't play with the pace. His nickname is Slow.
Yeah,
Doesn't play with the pace that some of these young players play with, but he's a smart player,
he is.
and he can
Veteran also.
from the front court, right? And the other thing on this is that what they keep insisting, and this is high levels of the organization, is that personality fit mattered. They want to give these young guys on the team, um, you know, other players who are of their like mindset. And again, without disparaging the player who's gone too much, he takes up all the air and all the oxygen in a room. And they wanted guys who fit better with this particular group and give them kind of a sigh of relief and let them grow together. So they did a lot of research on Wiggins and Mitchell and Anderson, all of whom have very good reputations with their current teams in terms of just the people that they are. They wanted those kind of fits here. And it reminds me a little bit of what I was told the night they drafted Bam. Somebody who's been with the Heat organization for a long time came up and said, and they dealt with issues with Hassan at that point, and
Hmm.
so this person said, we did more research on this prospect than any other prospect, and he's the anti-Hassan. That they got a guy who was totally different in mindset, and obviously Bam has blossomed into one of their franchise players and their captain. So that worked out. So they kind of went back to that where they wanted it. It wasn't just about the players; it was about the
Right.
people. They think they've added some guys who will fit well in that room.
Likes, comments, questions. I'll get to super chats right away. But otherwise, we'll get to comments, some of them at the end. I want to ask you about the pick, and then we can maybe switch it up a little bit. I was surprised that they got a good pick, not just a draft pick,
Mm-hmm.
but a good pick. It's a top 10
Mm-hmm.
protected Golden State Warriors pick this year, top 10 protected next year if it doesn't convey this year, and then the year after it's
Mm-hmm.
unprotected. So, in the event, for whatever reason, they're in the bottom 10 these next 2 years, which could
Mm-hmm.
happen even if they just miss the playoffs because of the lottery, then there's a potential for that pick being really, really valuable in a couple of years. Although the odds are on this conveying this year and just it not being a top 10 pick, but it could still be a lottery pick. Do you think Golden State just offered this out of desperation? Were they in that much of a position to do it? Because the way it looked was Jimmy Butler might not get moved with or for a pick unless it was maybe a pick swap or maybe a heavily protected pick. And this one's not
Mm-hmm.
that protected at all.
Yes, I think so. I think that Golden State, the problem that they ran into, I don't think there was the incompetence in Golden State that there is in Phoenix.
Sure.
Okay, so I
Yeah.
don't want to
Yeah.
attribute those two things, but it's just where they are as a franchise, right? Their two best players are entering their late 30s, and they are highly leveraged to those two players. And they just let another player they were highly leveraged to, who was extremely popular, leave for Dallas, right? But they're not in position to go young, not as long as Curry is there. And so I think I think there was miscalculations made by certain front offices. There's a lot of conversation about, well, did the Heat miscalculate whether they could manage Jimmy, right? That's a reasonable thing to say. Okay. But the miscalculations that were made by other front offices also played into this. Phoenix's miscalculation that they could move Bradley Beal or get somebody to take Bradley Beal, obviously a complete, like I said, disaster class. Okay. Golden State's was more, they thought that KD would want to play there. And they didn't get. I don't know, because I mean, Curry spoke to him, and I guess their intel just generally was not that good on that, because it seems like as an organization they were blindsided by the fact he wouldn't want to go. And I'm confused why they were blindsided, because I don't know why KD would have any interest in going back to Golden State. First thing, as long as Draymond's there, didn't make sense because the way that ended. But additionally, he never got credit for going there. for winning there. Now it's a different team there. Now it's not as good a team. It's not a dynastic type team that he joined before,
Right.
but still, like I don't understand what the purpose of him going back there. I mean, there's to me it would be more likely for LeBron to have gone back to Miami than KD to go to Golden State. Okay, I think that can be more justified by the particular person at this point. So I just think the Warriors. And then the problem was the Warriors' business got out there everywhere. And this is why teams like to keep things in house. And it became clear that they were desperate. And so now you're caught in between. The team's not playing that well. They're trying to get out of the play-in. Curry is, entering his late 30s. You have to make a move. We had heard, and it wasn't just me, okay? There were others in the media and then in Golden State media. I heard directly that from someone who is tied in with that organization that Curry really didn't want Steph. I mean, they really didn't want Jimmy. But at that point, again, the owner Joe Lacob was going to make the move. And if you see the way that Kerr reacted at his press conference, it seemed like he lost a child, like, with Wiggins leaving. Like, it
Yeah.
does not seem like they were happy about it.
Yeah.
And even Steph's comments were not all that welcoming. So it just seems like they got desperate. It feels like I will say this about the Heat, and this is why I may have actually graded them too low by saying B plus. They did not have leverage in every one of these situations, for sure. I mean, Jimmy took a lot of leverage out of their hands. They did the best they could with the leverage they had. And I really think that, the star of this is going to end up proving to be Andy in a lot of ways, because I just think they did not budge on this stuff. And he ultimately insisted on that pick. And that is a key part to this trade. I mean, that you're talking about getting a pick. I said if they got a pick, get the pick this year. Get the pick in 2025. Strong draft, lottery players all the way up until 20, gives you some flexibility. And also, if you're trying to refresh this core, do it right away. Like, you've got young players who are pretty advanced at this point. You could get competitive quickly. Getting into this draft was a big deal. So I think that, and they probably are going to get into the draft because I think the pick will convey. And if it doesn't, okay, it conveys the next year, or worst case, you get an unprotected in 27. So, and you get an unprotected from an organization that doesn't, I don't know how good they're going to be at
I
that
don't
point.
know either.
Curry might be retired. His
They might.
contract's up.
Yeah, and there's not even a guarantee they make the playoffs this year. Right now,
No.
the way the West is shaking out. So I want to
Right.
get into. I want to get into. We will throw up a couple comments on this before we switch gears. I want to ask you though. We did just see Jimmy Butler's introductory press
Mm-hmm.
conference before this started. There are a bunch of quotes. Just overall, what's your sort of your outlook on this? Because he's saying all the right things, that he has love for people in Miami and things of that nature, but he also said he has his joy back, which
Right.
it really means, hey, I got paid, so I'm happy again.
Right.
Essentially, because
Right.
I knew Golden State was desperate when he got the extension right away. But just
Yes.
what do you think of the press conference? And separately, two-part question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna turn this into Wiggins getting number 22 was
Yeah.
very
Oh, I said
interesting
he
to
would.
me. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
also,
you did call that. Yeah.
also, Jimmy took number 10 in Golden State. You know who used to wear that number?
Tim Hardaway. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying it's
Who
for
spoke?
Neymar. He's saying it's for Neymar, but
Well, he is a soccer guy, and that's certainly part of it. But
he's a
he knows
Neymar guy, especially.
he knows who wore that there. So yeah, I mean, there's something definitely to that. I mean, as far as 22, they should absolutely give him 22. Look, his number's not retired yet. Okay, at some point, if they retire it, then nobody else will wear 22. They gave Dragic's number to Lowry. Dragic didn't end the way that Jimmy did. So they literally placed Dragic with Lowry, and they gave him 7.
Someone
And
else
now Ware
pointed
wears
out
7.
someone else pointed out, you would know this better than me, that they gave
Mhm.
James Ennis 32 after Shaq
Yes,
before they retired
yes, they
Shaq's
did.
number.
Yes,
Okay.
they did.
That's a thing that
They
happened.
did.
All
And they
right.
also don't do tribute videos for anybody who doesn't win a championship. Although I think in this case,
They
they
better.
will stray from that. I know when Strus came back, Max was upset they didn't give him a tribute. We had to explain it to him that that's the way that they do things. It's all you have to have won a championship. So they should give a tribute video if Jarvis Varnado ever comes in and sits in the stands there. They should give him a tribute video, but not give Jimmy one. I
Elite
think that's
college
kind of a
shot
silly. I
blocker.
kind of think that's kind of a silly rule anyway.
Yeah.
But look, he's going to take the high road for now. I mean, it's funny because he said the truth will come out. The one thing about his comments, he kind of pivoted, and I haven't listened to the whole thing yet, but I've seen the quotes. He
Mhm.
started off very conciliatory, and then when Ramona asked him a question, he said there was a lot of back and forth. So Ramona asked, "So what made you want to leave?" And he said, "That's a good question. Actually, I don't know. Maybe just a lot of talking back and forth, and sooner or later, talking's got to stop." And the only thing I'll say to that is a lot of the talking was leaks from his friends.
And his agent.
Like he got upset. This is the part the Heat didn't understand. The He got upset because the Heat did not shut down Shams's Christmas report. But Shams's Christmas report didn't come from the Heat. So I don't understand why he wanted. They didn't understand it because they're like, we
Mhm.
didn't. Why would we put this out there? How does this benefit us for this to be out there right now? They didn't get that.
Right.
Now, of course, his agent Bernie Lee has said that he did not tell Shams. I know personally that Bernie does not like Shams. So the idea of him leaking to him, but it seemed like others were talking to Shams, and then Shams kind of made an educated guess. I can tell you that Dallas and Houston were never on Jimmy's list. So that report from the very beginning was off. The two teams I'd heard about from the beginning were Phoenix and Golden State,
Yes.
and
Yep.
he ended up with one of them.
Let's go to the super chat right here. Curtis skips the line super chat. Thank you
Mhm.
for that. Appreciate all the great coverage. What's the best conference new build of the Heat
It's a good
looking at
question.
history? 2000, 2001, he asked, post LeBron, 14, 15. Yesterday, when I had Greg on here as part of the deadline eve panel, which you should go check out. That's live on the channel here, and also the audios on the 5 Reasons NBA feed.
Hmm.
Greg kind of likened it to the 14-15 team, but
Much better.
more so the comparison of Wiggins to Luol Deng in
Hmm.
that regard, like post LeBron James, who I guess
Yeah,
Jimmy Butler would be that in this case.
and I guess Wade and Bosch in that case would be Hero and Bam.
Hero and Bam, yeah.
I do think there's a comp between Deng and Wiggins. I've made that comp as well. Spo got a lot out of Deng. He played him. Luol led the Heat in minutes in 15,
And
16.
you said you think Wiggins will do that for the
I
rest of
think
the
Wiggins
year.
will do that.
Mm.
He is the type of player that Spo will play to death. Because if you have a guy who's versatile, who can switch, gives you length, Spo's going to play that player. So and again, if somebody you can trust to be in the right place, I think he's going to play a lot. Like Lou played a lot. Lou had a very strong second season with Miami, mostly because when Bosch got sick, he got moved to the four and it unlocked him. Now they don't need to do that with Wiggins necessarily. Obviously, he's going to play. I think Wiggins can play some two if we're going to go with positions here. I think he's going to play some two with Tyler. He'll play some three.
I
He'll
think so
play as a
too.
small ball four at times as well. I think, but
Hmm.
they will. He's going to use them a lot. So I see a comp there. The big difference between this team and that team is that this team has a lot better uh, young reservoir of talent.
Yeah.
Like there was no Kalel Ware or Niko Jovic upside among any of the players around there. I mean, we're talking about this is a very young team now. Like we can okay, you got a couple in there obviously with Love and with Burks, but this is a very young team. Like they have a potential of a rotation averaging 26 years old. In that way, it reminds me a little bit more of 0304. Now that
Wade's
was
rookie year.
Wade's rookie
Yeah.
year, Karan's second year. They had
Odom,
veterans in
right?
Eddie Jones and Odom. And
Yeah.
Odom at 20 was 25 at the time, 24, 25. They had veterans like Brian Grant and Eddie Jones, but they were young. This reminds me more of that. I think it's actually the deepest young core they've ever had. If you just look at the fact that, see, the difference here too is their their supporting players have their upsides are higher. These are first round picks. These are first round picks. Like these are not, and not to disparage the guys they've let walk, like the Rodney McGruders and the Caleb Martins and the Max Struces and the Gabe Vincents and on and on and on. These are first round picks, okay, by a team that knows how to draft now, which
And
they didn't
developed.
really at the time. I mean, yes, Dwayne, yes, Karan, but obviously there was a long history before that of them not drafting or not prioritizing the draft. So this is a different beast in terms of that. Like I to me, Brian, they've built a team that's perfect for a star to come into.
This is where the Nets were in 18-19 when they
Hmm.
had D'Angelo Russell, Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert. Rondé Hollis Jefferson, and then they had a mix of veterans like Damari Carroll, for example. Jared Allen was young on that team. And then they ended up getting Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and eventually James Harden. Well, I don't think the Heat need to or are going to do that, like just change it
Mhm.
entirely. But that was an organization and a team that was ready for a star at that point because I was covering them at the time and we were talking about could they get Tobias Harris in free agency, and then
Right.
leading up to free agency, it was like, oh wait, no, they're actually like talking like big game hunting, like stealing air quotes, Kyrie
Mhm.
Irving and Kevin Durant from the Knicks, and
Right,
then that ended
right.
up happening. So now it's like, all right, you're in a position where the star you'd also be looking for is probably going to be 27, 28. It's not going to be
Mhm.
somebody who's 34, 35. So I think it just makes more sense in the direction that they're going.